No one expected it, no one was prepared. But when Donald Trump walked into the National Sports Summit, everything changed. The cameras had been rolling, capturing routine speeches from sports officials, coaches, and athletes from around the world. It was supposed to be just another day, a summit focused on fairness, inclusion, and the future of sports. But then, the doors swung open. There he was, Donald Trump, unannounced, uninvited, unstoppable. The room fell into a stunned silence as he made his way to the podium, ignoring the confused glances, the whispers, the flickering camera flashes. No security detail, no entourage, just Trump walking straight into the heart of the global sports community. And when he spoke, his words didn't just echo through the hall, they sent shockwaves around the world. I'm not here for applause. I'm not here for debate. I'm here to tell you the truth. What he said next. It wasn't just a speech, it was a statement that would divide nations, ignite protests, and change the world of sports forever. This is the story of that moment. And trust me, it's one you'll never forget. The National Sports Summit was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of the world's most influential athletes, coaches, sports executives, and policymakers. Held in the heart of Geneva, Switzerland, the Grand Conference Hall gleamed under crystal chandeliers, its polished floors reflecting the glow of international unity. Flags from over 150 countries lined the walls, symbolizing the spirit of global sportsmanship. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Olympic champions rubbed shoulders with FIFA executives, WNBA stars debated policy changes with top sports ministers, and reporters from every major network jostled for interviews. Panels on equality, inclusion, and the future of youth sports filled the schedule, each one met with applause, optimism, and hope. But beneath the polished surface there was tension. Whispers of Trump's recent executive order banning transgender women from female sports had already rippled through the crowd. Some attendees exchanged sharp glances, their conversations shifting from friendly banter to anxious speculation. Would the U.S. enforce these policies globally? Would it affect international competitions? Still, no one expected what happened next. As a keynote speaker wrapped up their final remarks, the lights dimmed slightly, an unplanned flicker that caught everyone off guard. Then, without introduction or announcement, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall creaked open. Donald Trump entered. There was no grand entourage, no security detail clearing the way. Just Trump walking with purpose, his trademark red tie stark against his dark suit. Conversations died mid-sentence. Some attendees froze, others exchanged confused looks. The event organizers scrambled, flipping through schedules. Trump wasn't supposed to be there. Ignoring the murmurs, Trump strode confidently down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing louder than the scattered applause, or was it applause at all? Perhaps just the sound of people unsure how to react. Some athletes glared in disbelief. Others reached for their phones, already recording. Without hesitation, he approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the room. His face was expressionless, but his eyes carried a sharpness, a man on a mission. No formal greeting, no preamble, just a simple, chilling declaration, "Let's stop pretending." The summit, designed to unite the global sports community, was about to become the epicenter of a political earthquake. And the aftershocks? They would be felt worldwide. The room was still reeling from the shock of his entrance. Donald Trump didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the murmurs or the stunned faces turned in his direction. He walked with the unmistakable confidence of a man who knew he didn't need an invitation. His presence alone commanded attention. The crowd seemed frozen in time, athletes clutching their notes mid-sentence, officials glancing nervously at each other, unsure whether this was part of the agenda or some kind of disruption. Trump's footsteps echoed through the hall, rhythmic and deliberate, as he approached the grand stage where world-renowned athletes had just shared heartfelt speeches about unity and inclusion. The contrast was jarring. Moments earlier, the stage had been a symbol of harmony. Now it felt like the eye of a brewing storm. Event organizers scrambled behind the scenes. Earpieces crackled with frantic voices. Was he scheduled? Who authorized this? Should we intervene? But no one moved, because no one knew what to do. Trump reached the podium, adjusted the microphone with a casual flick of his hand, and scanned the audience. His gaze swept across the room like a spotlight, locking eyes with confused athletes, stunned reporters, and silent dignitaries. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply stood there, waiting for the room to catch up with him. Then he spoke, his voice slicing through the thick silence. "I wasn't supposed to be here today." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like waves in a restless sea. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the defiant glint in his eyes, the subtle smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. But when you're making decisions that affect the future of sports, real sports, you're damn right I'm going to show up. Gasps echoed across the hall. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, phones raised, recording every word. Trump continued, his tone growing sharper. "You've spent the entire summit talking about fairness, inclusion, and all the usual buzzwords, but no one's talking about the truth." A pause. He let the tension hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Then he delivered the line that would ignite headlines around the world. "The truth is, biology isn't up for debate." The room erupted. Some delegates shot to their feet, shouting objections. A few athletes stormed out, shaking their heads in disbelief. But others stayed, their expressions unreadable, captivated by the audacity of the moment. Trump had hijacked the summit, and this was just the beginning. The room had barely settled when Trump gripped the edges of the podium, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, some shocked, others defiant, but all locked on him. The murmurs faded, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Everyone wanted to hear what he'd say next. He didn't disappoint. "For years," he began, his voice steady and unapologetic, "we've been told what to believe, how to think, and what to say. They call it progress. I call it nonsense." A ripple of discomfort passed through the audience. Some shifted in their seats, others exchanged nervous glances. But Trump wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. "I didn't come here for applause. I'm not interested in being polite. I'm here to talk about fairness, real fairness, not the kind you slap on a slogan or hashtag." The tension thickened. Athletes whispered among themselves, coaches frowned, and reporters furiously typed notes, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. "Let me make it simple," he continued, leaning in slightly, his tone sharper now. "Biological men should not compete in women's sports. It's not complicated, it's common sense." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap, gasps, shouts, protest signs hastily raised. A few delegates stood in protest, while others sat frozen, unsure whether to walk out or watch the spectacle unfold. Some athletes, champions in their own right, glared at Trump with a mix of rage and disbelief. But Trump didn't flinch. He thrived on the chaos. "You can scream, you can shout. You can call me whatever names you've got lined up. It doesn't change the facts. This isn't about discrimination. It's about competition. It's about protecting the integrity of women's sports, something no one here seems to care about anymore." The room erupted again. Some cheered, some booed. The division was undeniable, slicing through the summit like a blade. Event organizers frantically signaled for security, unsure if they should intervene. But Trump held his ground, undeterred. "You've all spent years pretending there's no difference, but today I'm here to remind you reality doesn't care about your feelings." It wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of war against the very ideals the summit was built on, and the world was watching. Just when it seemed Trump's words couldn't cause more chaos, he delivered the blow that no one saw coming. The crowd was still reeling, some delegates on their feet in protest, others glued to their seats, unable to look away. But Trump didn't pause. He thrived in the tension. With a calm, almost calculated demeanor, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This," he said, holding the document high for everyone to see, "is not just a statement. It's not a suggestion, it's policy." The room fell into a stunned silence. "As of today," he continued, "any country, any organization, any athletic body that wants to participate in U.S.-funded international sporting events will be required to adopt the same standards." Gasps filled the hall. This wasn't just about America anymore. Trump had drawn a line in the sand, and he was daring the world to cross it. "You want American sponsorship? You want access to our facilities, our athletes, our resources, then you'll play by the same rules, no exceptions, no loopholes." The backlash was immediate. Delegates shouted in protest. Some athletes stormed out, their faces flushed with anger. Journalists frantically typed, broadcasting Trump's words live to millions of viewers around the globe. But Trump wasn't finished. "I've already secured agreements," he announced, slamming the document onto the podium. Major sports federations, private sponsors, even entire countries, they're already on board. A wave of disbelief washed over the crowd. Had he really convinced other nations to support this? The idea seemed impossible until he named them. As of this morning, he declared, we've secured compliance from multiple countries across Europe, Asia, and South America. They know what's at stake. They know that fairness isn't negotiable. The room exploded. Delegates shouted accusations of betrayal. Athletes chanted in protest. Some leaders rushed to their phones, scrambling to confirm or deny Trump's claims. But the damage was done. Trump stepped back from the podium, a smug grin spreading across his face as the chaos unfolded. He had hijacked the summit, turned it into his stage, and left the world to grapple with the fallout. You don't have to agree, he said over the noise, but you'll have to choose, comply or be left behind. It wasn't just a speech, it was an ultimatum, and the world had just been put on notice. The moment Trump's ultimatum echoed through the Grand Hall, the room erupted into chaos. What had started as a prestigious summit turned into a battlefield of ideologies, emotions, and political tensions, all unfolding under the unblinking gaze of cameras broadcasting live to millions worldwide. Delegates surged to their feet, voices overlapping in a storm of outrage. Some slammed their fists on tables, demanding the microphone to respond. Athletes, Olympians, world champions, stood in protest, their faces a mix of disbelief and fury. A few held banners hastily pulled from their bags. Sports for all. Inclusion is power. Respect over politics. Trump didn't flinch. While the crowd descended into disorder, he stood firm at the podium, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with the faintest hint of a smirk, as if this was exactly what he wanted. On one side of the room, European delegates led the charge, denouncing Trump's ultimatum as a violation of international sports ethics. "This is not leadership," one French official shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "You cannot dictate to the world what fairness looks like." A German representative added, slamming her folder shut in disgust, but not everyone opposed him. Across the hall, pockets of unexpected support emerged. Delegates from a few countries, stoic and unapologetic, nodded in agreement. A high-ranking official from an Eastern European nation stood up and declared, "We stand with the United States. Fairness in sports has been compromised for too long." The divide grew sharper, not along geographical lines, but ideological ones. It wasn't just the room that was split, it was the world. Athletes began to clash, not physically, but with words that cut just as deep. "You're erasing people's identities," an Olympic gold medalist yelled, her voice cracking with emotion. "No," a U.S. coach shot back. "We're protecting the integrity of the game." The media frenzy intensified. Cameras zoomed in on every heated exchange. Journalists shouted questions, their voices drowned by the uproar. Is this the end of global sports unity? Has Trump just created an international sports war? Meanwhile, event organizers scrambled behind the scenes, desperately trying to regain control. Security was called, not because of violence, but because the summit had spiraled into something no one could contain. And through it all, Trump remained unmoved. He leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is the problem. You'd rather scream than face the truth, but it doesn't matter. The decision's been made." With that, he turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a summit in ruins and a world forever changed. Because this wasn't just a debate about sports anymore. It was a battle for the soul of fairness itself. As Trump disappeared behind the curtains, the chaos he left behind continued to swirl. Delegates argued, athletes protested. The National Sports Summit had become a symbol of division, its once unifying purpose shattered in a matter of minutes. But Trump wasn't done. Just as the crowd seemed to reach a boiling point, the large screens flanking the stage flickered to life. The noise in the room dulled as all eyes turned to the massive displays, expecting perhaps a standard news feed or an official statement from the summit organizers. Instead, it was Trump, pre-recorded, calculated. His face filled the screen, his expression serious. Gone was the smug grin from earlier. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "you've made your choice, but I haven't shown you everything." The room fell into a tense silence. "You see," he continued, "this summit was never about debate. It was about exposure. exposure of who truly controls sports and who's willing to stand for fairness. Suddenly, the screen split into grids, revealing classified documents, financial reports, and confidential agreements between major sports organizations and corporate sponsors. Names flashed, powerful figures from international sports bodies, governments, even non-profits, exposed for making backdoor deals. Shock rippled through the crowd. "While you were busy arguing," Trump's voice continued, "I've been negotiating." The screen shifted again, this time showing signed agreements from influential sports federations across the globe. Some of the very officials who had just condemned Trump's speech had already aligned with his policies behind closed doors. Gasps echoed. Eyes darted across the room. Betrayal was in the air. "You thought you were here to make decisions," Trump sneered, "but the decisions were already made." The camera cut to one final image. A new logo. A sleek, sharp emblem, combining the U.S. flag with the symbol of an international sports coalition. Below it, the words, "The Global Fairness Accord, effective immediately." The implications were clear. Trump hadn't just crashed the summit. He'd orchestrated it. This wasn't about starting a conversation. It was about seizing control. As the screen went dark, the room remained silent, not out of respect, but out of pure, stunned disbelief. Trump had played them all, and the world would never be the same. The ripple effect was immediate. Within hours of Trump's final move, the world was thrown into chaos. News outlets across the globe exploded with headlines. Trump's Global Fairness Accord sparks international outrage. Betrayal in broad daylight. Sports leaders exposed in secret deals. Athletes revolt. Mass protests erupt following Trump's shocking ultimatum. In major cities worldwide, the streets filled with protesters, athletes, activists, and ordinary people standing shoulder to shoulder, their voices echoing through the night. Placards waved in defiance. "Sports belong to everyone. Inclusion is not a negotiation. We will not be silenced." Athletes from every discipline, Olympians, soccer legends, basketball stars, began publicly denouncing the accord. Some even refused to compete, boycotting tournaments, walking out of press conferences, and cutting ties with organizations that had secretly aligned with Trump's policy. Entire nations responded with fury. Canada, France, and New Zealand immediately withdrew from U.S.-funded sports events. African and South American countries formed emergency coalitions, vowing to create independent leagues free from American influence. The United Nations convened an emergency session to discuss the political overreach into global sports, with some leaders labeling Trump's actions as an attack on international sovereignty. Yet, amidst the outrage, there was undeniable support in certain corners. Some countries embraced the accord, enforcing strict new regulations overnight. Private sponsors, swayed by the promise of fairness, redirected millions in funding to organizations that complied with Trump's vision. The divide was no longer just ideological. It was global. It was personal. And Trump? He stayed silent. No press conferences, no statements, just the lingering echo of his final words. The decisions were already made. But the world wasn't ready to accept that, because what started as a speech at a summit had ignited a global movement, not just against Trump, but against the systems that had allowed power to be seized so easily, so quietly. This wasn't just about sports anymore. It was about control. It was about identity. It was about the future. And the fight? It had only just begun. In the end, it wasn't just another summit. It wasn't just another speech. It was a turning point. A moment when the lines between sports and politics blurred so completely that the world could no longer ignore them. What began as a high-profile event quickly became something far more consequential, a shift that sent shockwaves through communities, corporations, and even casual observers. The very idea of what sports should represent, fair play, unity, and a level playing field, suddenly found itself at odds with a world increasingly drawn to division and spectacle. Donald Trump didn't simply walk into the National Sports Summit. He stepped onto the global stage, wielding a microphone like a gavel, delivering declarations that would ignite 1,000 debates. His words resonated far beyond the walls of that grand conference hall. They spilled into everyday life, sparking discussions at dinner tables and fueling protests that took to the streets. As social media lit up with hashtags and hot takes, the controversy percolated into boardrooms where executives and sponsors were forced to rethink their allegiances, strategies, and guiding principles. What was supposed to be a gathering dedicated to unity among athletes, fans, and industry leaders had, in a matter of hours, transformed into an international standoff, one that questioned the very foundations of fairness, inclusion, and who truly holds the power to write the rules. Yet there's a deeper question lingering. Was this all part of Trump's plan from the start? Were we witnessing something carefully orchestrated? A deliberate rift carved into the fabric of global sports and beyond? Or was this simply a continuation of a pattern that has haunted our headlines and shaped our public discourse for years? In the aftermath, it's hard not to wonder if the uproar was the real objective, a testament to how readily society can be shaken by a few provocative statements delivered at just the right moment. But maybe it was never really about sports. Maybe it was about power, about revealing how susceptible entire industries, nations, and ideologies can be to a single individual's narrative. The casual observer might dismiss these events as yet another flashpoint in an endless news cycle, but for anyone watching closely, it's clear that the aftershocks are anything but fleeting. The dust may be settling, but the fight, over policy, over principle, over perception, has only just begun. These battles aren't confined to locker rooms or stadiums. They're unfolding in legislative halls, in corporate think tanks, and in conversations among neighbors and friends. They're happening in real time, shaping the future of how we define fairness in competition, inclusivity in policies, and the boundaries between sports and the politics that often overshadow them. So what do you think? Is this merely politics creeping into the realm of sports? Or is it indicative of a larger struggle for control, identity, and influence? Are the changes proposed in the name of fairness actually safeguarding the spirit of the games we love? Or do they mask deeper attempts to solidify power? Let your voice be heard. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Join the dialogue that's taking place in stadium seats, online forums, and on city streets around the world. Where do you stand? Are you with those demanding action, or are you skeptical of the motives behind this movement? If this story resonated with you, if it made you question the intersection of sports and the sweeping currents of global politics, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning. Because sometimes the most astonishing chapters in history aren't woven from fiction at all. They're written day by day, in real time, by people who choose to speak out, take a stand, and shape the future they want to see.